Have you ever noticed how someone can act cold, even a little distant, but deep down you feel there's something more? That quiet pull, that sense that he's not saying everything he feels. Let me ask you this: have you ever had a man act like he doesn't care, but his actions contradict his words? That gap between what he shows you and what he actually feels is where the truth lies. Today, we're going to peel back the psychology behind it and uncover the signs that someone may be obsessed with you, even if they're trying their hardest to hide it. Have you ever noticed how someone's words say one thing, but their little behaviors tell a completely different story? It's like they're trying to wear a mask of indifference, but their actions keep slipping through the cracks. And if you're paying close attention, those cracks reveal more than their words ever could. This is where psychology becomes fascinating. People often underestimate how much their small habits betray their true feelings. When someone is obsessed with you, even if they're trying to act distant, it shows up in these micro behaviors, the little patterns that can't be rehearsed or faked for long. Think about this. We all operate on autopilot most of the day. If you're walking through a store, you're not consciously deciding where your eyes land or how your body tilts when you stand near someone. These are subconscious signals. That's why when someone is deeply drawn to you, they start creating opportunities to be near you without even realizing it. They may tell themselves it's coincidence, but there's a reason he keeps showing up at the coffee shop you like, or why he chooses the seat next to you even when the room is half empty. The brain craves proximity to what it desires, and it will invent rational excuses to get it. That's not chance. That's compulsion masquerading as convenience. Psychologists talk about the concept of attentional bias, which simply means our brain pays more attention to things we're emotionally invested in. Imagine scrolling through social media. Out of hundreds of posts, your eyes stop at the one person you care about. It's not deliberate, it's automatic. In the same way, when someone is obsessed, their attention keeps circling back to you. That's why you'll notice subtle things like them catching details about you that others don't. Maybe they remember your coffee order, or they repeat back a phrase you used weeks ago. These little traces of attention are signals that their mind is looping around you far more often than they let on. Another micro behavior that reveals obsession is unnecessary communication. It could be a text that doesn't really have a purpose, just a meme, or, "Hey, did you see this?" On the surface, it seems casual. But here's what's really happening. They're looking for an excuse to keep the connection alive, because obsession isn't comfortable in silence. Silence feels like distance, and distance feels like danger. So they fill the gap with random touches of contact just to maintain the thread. Now, here's something important micro. Behaviors aren't just about presence, they're about absence too. When someone is obsessed, you might find them struggling to disengage. They'll say they're busy, they'll act distracted, but somehow they're still orbiting around your world. Think about the person who says they're too swamped to talk, yet you see them watching your stories online within minutes of you posting. That's not indifference, that's investment, because obsession has a way of leaking into digital behaviors just as much as physical ones. You'll also notice patterns in body language. They might lean in when you speak, mirror your gestures, or unconsciously face their body toward you in a group. None of this is consciously planned. It's a natural gravitation. The body doesn't lie. When someone's obsessed, they can pretend with words, but their posture, their gaze, their little reactions betray the truth. They may even overcompensate by acting extra distant, but even that is a tell. Distance requires effort. It's a performance. Real indifference requires nothing. If they're acting, it's because there's something to hide. What makes this powerful to recognize is that it saves you from the trap of confusion. So many people get caught in the mixed signals. He says he doesn't care, but then he does this. Understanding micro behaviors gives you clarity because you stop listening only to what is said and you start observing what is shown. Words can be polished, but habits are raw. Words are chosen, but micro behaviors are slipped. And it's in those slips that you find the truth. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who claims they're not really invested, but whenever you mention spending time with someone else, their eyes narrow, their tone shifts, or they suddenly make themselves available. That's a micro behavior screaming louder than any statement. It's obsession breaking through the wall of control. Or think of the person who tells you they're fine with space, yet they keep appearing in your social circles. They may not admit it outright, but their choices betray their state of mind. At the end of the day, the lesson here is that obsession doesn't live in declarations. It lives in the small, almost invisible habits that repeat over time. The texts that don't need to be sent but are. The sudden appearance in places they shouldn't need to be. The body that angles toward you no matter how much they try to look away. If you learn to notice these subtle cues, you'll see the story that their words are too afraid to tell. Have you ever wondered why someone who claims to be detached reacts so strongly to the smallest things you do? It doesn't quite add up, does it? On the surface, they appear distant, cool and unaffected, but then one small action from you sends a ripple through their behavior. This is the fascinating part of human psychology. Our strongest feelings leak out through disproportionate reactions. When someone is obsessed, their emotional intensity cannot stay hidden, and it often comes out sideways through subtle but noticeable overreactions to situations that shouldn't matter nearly as much as they do. Imagine you don't reply to a message for a few hours. Rationally, that shouldn't mean much. People are busy, life gets in the way. But for someone deeply entangled in thoughts of you, those hours feel magnified. Their mind starts running loops. Why hasn't she answered? Who is she with? What's more important than me right now? What would be a non-issue for most people becomes a spark that lights up their anxiety. And when they finally do reach out, you notice a sharp edge in their tone or a strange coldness in their next text. That's not casual. That's obsession poking through the surface. The same happens in moments of jealousy. You mention spending time with a friend, and suddenly their mood changes. They may act dismissive, make a cutting remark, or pull back for a while. These are not random shifts. They are emotional overreactions rooted in the fear of losing control. When someone is obsessed, your smallest interactions with others feel threatening, even when you've done nothing wrong. The intensity of their response gives them away. What's really happening beneath these reactions is a psychological principle known as emotional salience. The brain highlights what it cares most about, and because of this, the stakes feel higher. Think of it like this: if you misplace a pen, you shrug it off. But if you misplace your phone, panic sets in. The same is true here. For a person who is obsessed, every small action of yours feels magnified in importance. You may see it as casual, but they perceive it as monumental. Overreactions can also show up in moments of silence. If you've ever noticed someone become unreasonably upset because you didn't say goodbye properly, or because you seemed a little distracted, that's not about the moment itself. It's about the emotional weight they've attached to your presence. When someone's feelings run this deep, absence feels like rejection, and rejection feels unbearable. That's why they swing emotionally, sometimes snapping, sometimes sulking, sometimes withdrawing completely, all because of something that objectively should not carry that much weight. One of the clearest examples of this is in the digital world. Social media has become a playground for emotional tells. If someone gets visibly irritated or unusually quiet because of who liked your photo, or if they suddenly start posting things designed to grab your attention right after you post, those are not coincidences. They are emotional overreactions born from a place of preoccupation. When someone is indifferent, they don't notice these details. But when they're obsessed, every tiny digital footprint you leave feels like a message to them, and they can't help but respond. There's also a subtler layer here. Sometimes their overreactions don't come out as anger or jealousy, but as exaggerated interest. Maybe you mention a small win in your day, and they explode with enthusiasm that feels almost too much for the situation. Or you bring up a minor frustration, and they react as though it's a crisis. These are still overreactions, only in a positive costume. It shows they're emotionally invested in your world far beyond what's reasonable for the level of closeness they're pretending to have. The danger, of course, is that these reactions can create confusion. You might wonder, if he's distant, why does he care so much about what I do? But that is the very contradiction of obsession. On one hand, there's the performance of cool indifference. On the other, there's the unavoidable surge of emotion that breaks through in exaggerated ways. Once you recognize this, you stop doubting yourself. You stop wondering if you're imagining things, because the truth is written in their responses. What you're really seeing in these overreactions is an internal struggle. They're trying to manage powerful feelings they don't want to admit to. And so the pressure builds. Every unreturned text, every mention of another person, every change in your tone becomes a trigger. Their emotional compass swings wildly, betraying just how much you matter to them. And it's in those reactions, not in the carefully chosen words, that their obsession is revealed. Have you ever been in a situation where someone seems to vanish only to reappear with intensity as if nothing happened? One day they're messaging you constantly, making you feel like the center of their world, and the next they fall silent, leaving you to question what changed. That roller coaster of attention isn't randomness. It's one of the clearest psychological indicators that their feelings run deeper than they are willing to admit. Inconsistency in communication is not usually a sign of indifference. More often is a reflection of an internal battle. Think about what happens when someone is obsessed but afraid of revealing it. On the days when emotion takes over, they can't resist the urge to reach out. They'll send texts, call unexpectedly, or flood your day with reminders of their presence. Then, almost as quickly, guilt or fear pulls them back. They worry about seeming too available, too vulnerable, too obvious. So they retreat, leaving a vacuum of silence. But that silence is not evidence of detachment. It is evidence of self-control being forced into action. And self-control rarely lasts forever. What's interesting is how these inconsistencies create a rhythm. It's rarely random. Often, you'll find that the more distant they act, the stronger their return will be. This is because emotional intensity builds in the absence. When they stop themselves from reaching out, the preoccupation doesn't disappear. It grows louder in their mind. By the time they can't hold back anymore, the pendulum swings to the other extreme and they shower you with attention. This back and forth is not about you doing something wrong, but about them wrestling with their own depth of feeling. Psychologists often call this push-pull behavior. On the surface, it looks like hot and cold affection, but underneath, it's rooted in the fear of being exposed. To be consistently communicative requires acceptance of vulnerability. And for someone who doesn't want to admit how much you mean, consistency feels dangerous. So they oscillate, torn between the safety of withdrawal and the uncontrollable urge of connection. If you've ever felt whiplash from someone's communication patterns, you've likely experienced this dynamic. One week they're asking about your day, showing curiosity about your world, responding quickly to your messages. Then suddenly, they slow down, replies become short, and you feel like you've lost their attention. But before you can fully adjust to the distance, they reappear, more eager than before, acting as if nothing unusual happened. That inconsistency is not random behavior, it's the hallmark of someone who can't balance their feelings. It also shows up in timing. You'll notice they might ignore your message for hours, but when they do reply, it's long, thoughtful, and filled with signs of investment. Or maybe they'll disappear for a couple of days, but then send a message that feels like they've been thinking about you the whole time. This is not the communication pattern of someone indifferent. Indifference is flat, predictable, and lacking in energy. Inconsistency, on the other hand, is the communication style of someone who is overthinking, overfeeling, and overmanaging. Even more revealing is the way they respond to your distance. If you take a step back and they suddenly close the gap, it shows that their inconsistency is reactive. They may retreat when they feel safe, but the moment they sense you pulling away, their need for connection overrides their attempt to appear calm. That is the tug of war of obsession. It cannot tolerate the idea of being forgotten, even while it tries to maintain the illusion of control. In digital behavior, the pattern becomes even clearer. They might leave your messages unread while still engaging with your content elsewhere. They won't reply, but they'll watch your stories, like your photos, or make sure they're visible in your online space. This contradiction is not casual. It's a sign of someone who wants to maintain distance while simultaneously refusing to let go of connection. Their silence is rarely true silence. It's filled with quiet signals meant to remind you of their presence. Another layer of this inconsistency is that it often creates emotional confusion for you. You begin to question, is he into me or isn't he? And that's the very reason it's such a powerful sign of obsession. People who are indifferent don't inspire confusion. They are clear in their lack of effort. But when someone is both pulling away and surging forward, it reveals intensity beneath the surface. They want to be close, but they're scared of how much that closeness exposes them. If you step back and observe the pattern, you'll realize that inconsistency in communication is less about carelessness and more about struggle. It's the mark of someone trying to manage emotions that feel too big to control. The retreat isn't absence of feeling, it's a defense against it. And the return, when it comes, is not random. It's the pressure of unexpressed obsession finally breaking through. Have you ever caught someone using the same words or phrases you use, almost as if your language has slipped into their vocabulary without them realizing it? Or maybe you've noticed they start laughing in a similar rhythm, adopting little gestures that look suspiciously like your own. This is no accident. When someone is deeply invested in you, mirroring becomes one of the most telling signs of that connection. It's not usually conscious, and that's what makes it so powerful, because people can choose their words, but they don't often choose their unconscious imitation of the person they're drawn to. Mirroring is a psychological phenomenon rooted in what are called mirror neurons. These are cells in the brain that fire not only when we perform an action, but also when we see someone else do it. It's the reason why you yawn when someone nearby yawns, or why you smile back when you see another person smiling. But when someone is obsessed, this natural human wiring becomes magnified. Their brain is so tuned in to your presence that they start reflecting you back to yourself in subtle ways. Think about the way conversations flow. If you tend to speak in short bursts, they might start speaking in shorter sentences too. If you lean forward when talking, they might lean in as well. Even things like crossing your arms, tilting your head, or playing with your hair can be mirrored unconsciously by someone who's locked in on you. It's not a strategy they're planning. It's a sign of psychological alignment. Their body and mind are sensing with yours because, on some level, they want to be in harmony with you. What makes mirroring such a clear sign of obsession is the consistency. Once or twice could be coincidence, but when it becomes a pattern, you begin to see the deeper truth. You mention a new show you're watching, and suddenly they've watched it too. You talk about trying a new workout, and a week later, they're bringing it up like it's their own idea. When someone is drawn to you, they want to inhabit your world, even if it means borrowing pieces of your identity along the way. It also reveals itself in speech. Notice the words and phrases you use most often. Maybe you have a unique way of describing something or a little saying you fall back on. When those same words start coming out of their mouth, it's not because they've suddenly discovered them. It's because they've been absorbing you. Repetition is one of the strongest tells of obsession because it means they're not just listening, they're internalizing. The psychology behind this is fascinating. Humans mirror those they admire, respect, or desire as a way of building rapport. It's a subconscious attempt to say, we're the same. It creates connection and closeness without having to say it outright. But when it crosses into obsession, the mirroring becomes more pronounced. It's not just about connection anymore. It's about alignment. They don't just want to be with you. They want to be like you. Sometimes the mirroring is subtle and almost charming, like when they pick up your laugh. Other times it can be surprisingly deep, like adopting your outlooks or even your opinions. You might notice that after you share your perspective on something, they echo it later as if it's their own. This isn't necessarily manipulative. It's often unintentional. Their attachment to you is so strong that your worldview becomes the lens they want to see through. Even in digital interactions, mirroring shows up. If you tend to text with emojis, suddenly their messages start including the same ones. If you like sending voice notes, they start sending them too. They're syncing their style to yours, creating a rhythm of communication that feels familiar because it is yours. That level of imitation is rarely deliberate. It's the unconscious influence of obsession shaping behavior. Mirroring can also extend into timing. Pay attention to whether they respond in the same rhythm you set. If you reply quickly, they reply quickly. If you take longer, they begin to take longer. It's an attempt to match your pace, to feel aligned with the way you operate. That alignment is comforting to them because it feels like closeness, and closeness is what they crave most. At its core, mirroring is about connection. But when it becomes persistent, it transforms into one of the clearest signs of hidden obsession. They may not come out and say how deeply they think about you, but their unconscious mind is saying it for them. Their body, their words, their habits all start to look like yours. It's like a quiet confession played out in the subtle theater of everyday life. Have you ever noticed how someone who claims to be detached suddenly becomes very present the moment you feel uncomfortable or vulnerable? It's as though the mask of distance falls away and their instinct to protect takes over. This protective impulse is one of the most revealing signs of obsession because it bypasses logic. A person can control their words, they can pretend not to care, but when someone they are deeply invested in feels threatened or uneasy, their reactions are almost automatic. That instinct comes from a primal part of human connection, the part that wants to preserve what it values most. Protection doesn't always show up in dramatic gestures. It often reveals itself in small, everyday behaviors. Maybe you're walking through a crowded street and they subtly guide you to the safer side of the sidewalk. Maybe someone makes a comment that bothers you and without hesitation, they step in to defend you. Or perhaps you express frustration about something in your life and suddenly they're offering solutions, support, or just silent presence to make sure you feel understood. These are not random acts of kindness. They are emotional investments disguised as casual concern. What makes this particularly fascinating is that it's often inconsistent with the way they try to present themselves. They may act distant most of the time, trying to maintain control over how much they reveal, but when your well-being is at stake, their guard drops. The protective instinct is stronger than their performance of indifference. This is why it's such a telling sign. Someone who is truly uninterested doesn't feel the need to intervene. They may sympathize, but they don't act. Obsession, however, drives action. It compels a person to step in to make sure you're okay because your safety and happiness have become tied to their own emotional stability. There's a psychology behind this that explains why protection is such a giveaway. Humans have a natural instinct to protect those they feel bonded to. It comes from deep evolutionary roots. Protecting one's group ensured survival. When someone feels obsessed, that instinct is magnified. Your comfort and safety trigger the same internal response as a family member or loved one might. It may not even make sense to them logically, but the attachment runs deep enough that their protective side overrides their attempt at detachment. It's not just about physical protection either. Emotional protection is equally revealing. Pay attention to how they respond when you share your insecurities or when you're criticized by others. Do they jump in to reassure you? Do they try to make you feel better, even if they pretend to be distant in other contexts? That urge to protect your emotional state is as much a sign of obsession as guarding you physically. It shows that your inner world matters to them in a way they cannot fully hide. Even jealousy can be seen as a distorted form of protection. When they react strongly to the idea of someone else taking your attention, it's not just about control. It's about safeguarding their perceived place in your life. They may not admit this, but the underlying psychology is clear. They see you as valuable, and anything that threatens that bond sparks a protective reaction. This is why they may bristle at the mention of another person or subtly try to discredit competition without openly admitting why. Sometimes protection shows up in planning. If they go out of their way to ensure you're not inconvenienced, like making sure you get home safely, or offering to fix something that frustrates you, it's not because they're bored. It's because they can't stand the thought of you struggling. It may seem practical on the surface, but underneath it's an emotional need to be the one who keeps your world safe. That need is rooted in obsession, the kind that blurs the line between caring and overcaring. What makes the protective instinct such a strong sign is that it breaks through even in moments when they're trying to keep distance. They can ignore your texts for a day, but if they hear that you're sick, upset, or in trouble, they'll appear without hesitation. This isn't rational. It's reflexive. Their emotions override their active detachment, and that tells you more about their true state of mind than any carefully chosen words ever could. If you step back, you'll notice a pattern. Protective gestures don't happen once and vanish. They repeat themselves. The consistency of this instinct reveals what's really happening beneath the surface. Someone who is indifferent won't go out of their way to protect you repeatedly. Someone who is obsessed can't help but do it, even if it risks exposing the depth of their feelings. Their actions betray them because protection is not something you can fake for long. It's either instinctual or it isn't. Have you ever noticed how some people manage to always be around when it matters most, even when they seem distant the rest of the time? It's almost as though their presence follows a rhythm, showing up at just the right moments. This isn't luck or coincidence. It's a psychological pattern that reveals more than words ever could. When someone is obsessed, they find ways to insert themselves into your life, sometimes quietly, sometimes boldly, but always consistently enough that you feel them there even when they try to hide their feelings. Patterns of presence can be subtle. It might look like them appearing at places you frequent, not because they had to be there, but because they knew there was a chance you would. Maybe they show up at gatherings you didn't expect them to attend or happen to cross paths with you more often than seems accidental. These are not random alignments of schedules. They are unconscious choices driven by the desire to remain part of your world. Even when someone acts aloof, their feet often betray them by carrying them closer to what their heart wants. This presence also reveals itself in timing. You might not hear from them daily, but when you're going through something difficult, suddenly they appear. They check in when you're sick. They reach out when you've had a bad day, or they offer support when life gets overwhelming. To others, it may look like coincidence, but to you it feels uncanny. The truth is, obsession tunes their attention to your highs and lows. They're watching closely, even from a distance, and the moment they sense an opening to be needed, they show up. This is their way of staying relevant, of keeping a tie to you without openly declaring it. There's also a rhythm in how they occupy your digital space. You may not get constant messages, but their presence is felt in other ways. They view your stories, like your posts, or comment just enough to remind you that they're still there. It's a delicate balance, not too much to seem obvious, but never so little that you forget them entirely. This digital shadowing is one of the clearest signs of someone who cannot let go, even if they're pretending to stay away. The compulsion to be near you translates into a pattern of quiet visibility. One of the most telling signs of obsession through presence is their tendency to appear at pivotal moments. They might not text for weeks, but right after you post something vulnerable, they respond. Or they may stay silent during your routine days, but suddenly reappear when you're celebrating a win. This isn't chance. It's calculated intuition born from constant focus on you. They're attuned to your life in ways that reveal where their attention is anchored. If you pay close enough attention, you'll notice that their timing isn't random at all. It's strategic, even if they don't realize they're doing it. What makes patterns of presence so revealing is that they go beyond words or conscious planning. Anyone can say they care, anyone can declare interest, but consistently being there, especially at significant moments, is a behavior that requires emotional investment. It's difficult to fake over long periods of time. Presence has energy to it. It requires thought, action, and effort. When someone is obsessed, they'll expend that effort without even recognizing it. Their choices create a rhythm of appearances that gives them away. Even the excuses they give for showing up become telling. They might say, "Oh, I just happened to be nearby," or "I thought you might need this." But if you look closely, you'll see that these justifications repeat themselves. The "just happened to be here" line appears too often to be random. That's because it isn't random. It's a pattern of making sure they are woven into your life. No matter how much they try to downplay it, another layer of this is how they balance absence with presence. They may pull away for stretches of time, but when they return, they do it in a way that reestablishes their place in your orbit. It's almost like they're saying without words, "Don't forget I exist." That need to reinsert themselves is a direct result of obsession. It's not enough for them to be gone completely. They need to maintain a thread of relevance, and that thread is woven through their repeated appearances. Presence also carries an emotional weight. You feel it not just in where they show up, but in how they make themselves available. When you need help, they suddenly find time. When you need reassurance, They offer it without hesitation. They may not always be consistent in their day-to-day communication, but when life tests you, they reveal themselves through action. That's because obsession drives them to stay tethered to your emotional world, and they can't resist the pull of being significant in your life. When you start connecting the dots, the pattern becomes obvious. They might not be there all the time, but they're always there enough to remind you of their presence, enough to stay close without crossing the line of confession, enough to keep their feelings hidden but their connection alive. And once you see that rhythm, you realize it's not distance you're witnessing. It's the careful choreography of someone who can't stay away. When you step back and connect the dots, a powerful truth emerges. Distance doesn't always mean detachment. Sometimes it's just the disguise of someone who feels far more than they're willing to admit. You see it in the little micro behaviors they can't control, in the emotional overreactions that don't match the situation, in the inconsistent communication that swings between silence and intensity. You see it in the way they mirror your words, your gestures, your very energy, and in how their instinct to protect you overrides the act of indifference they try so hard to maintain. And you see it most clearly in their patterns of presence, those consistent moments when they somehow show up right where you need them, as if pulled by a force they don't fully understand themselves. The lesson is this: don't take distance at face value. Look at the psychology beneath it. People can disguise their feelings with words, with postures, with controlled silence, but their actions, repeated over time, always tell the story. Obsession leaks through the cracks, and when you know what to look for, you'll stop being confused by mixed signals. You'll start to recognize that what seems like indifference may, in fact, be intensity trying to stay hidden. And once you see it, you have a choice. The power is not in wondering whether they're obsessed with you. The power is in deciding what you want, what you deserve, and whether their actions truly match the standard you set for your life.